and a warm welcome to all of you. We're glad you were able to make it here today. We're going to now listen to Brother Aaron Geronimus with the theme, Coping with Life's Anxiety.
All right, to start, please imagine that it's August 5th, 2010, and you are in the mining business in Chile. So now it seems like just another day in the mine. You head off to the San Jose copper gold mine, but on this day, around 2 p.m., part of the mine collapses, trapping you and 32 others nearly half a mile beneath the Earth's surface. Now, you try to escape through the ventilation shafts, but the ladders that are supposed to be there, that are required to be there by safety codes, are missing. Corners were cut, and now you don't know if you'll be able to escape. You don't know if escape is possible. Well, you might realize that this is not just a theoretical situation. This is history. This really happened. And those 33 men had no idea, no way of knowing that they would be trapped for 69 days. And they would have no way of knowing that all of them would survive. Now, can you imagine the anxiety that these men must have felt? Now, I start with this story, this true story, because one of the Hebrew words that's translated into English as anxiety literally means confined in a physical sense. And it can be rendered wrapped up, shut up, or cramped. So I think you would agree that applies to those miners. They were confined in a physical sense, and they must have felt so much anxiety. And now we too are confined in many ways on account of this pandemic that continues to drag on and makes us feel anxious. No doubt we had anxiety before, and then this long pandemic on top of it. But all of us will be saved, not through the current circumstances, but through the last days. But in the meantime, we need to cope. And that's the point of this talk. It's not avoiding life's anxieties, because we can't do that entirely. We're going to have anxiety. How do we cope? That's the focus. Well, let's go to 1 Peter 5:7. Of course, it's the Bible that helps us to cope. And let's start with this verse. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7. Says, while you throw all your anxiety on him, speaking of God, because he cares for you. So we're told to throw our anxiety on Jehovah because he cares. We want to turn to him because he loves us. He wants to help us to cope. And that makes all the difference. Let's say that you were having some strange digestive issues. Who would you tell? Would you tell the random stranger in the grocery line? I don't think so. They don't want to hear that. But you could tell your doctor, or you could tell a close family friend, and what will they do? They'll ask follow-up questions because they're interested. They care about you. They want to help you. So knowing somebody cares really makes all the difference. So here Jehovah is telling us, I care about you. So please tell me what's going on. But what does it mean to throw our anxiety on him? Well, it means we need to do things his way. We need to take advantage of the help that Jehovah provides. So what help does he give us? In this talk, we'll discuss 5 things. Jehovah gives us to help cope with our anxiety: peace, comfort, guidance, necessities, and support. Sorry, I don't have a clever acronym for it, but we'll just go through one at a time. First, we have peace. How does Jehovah give us peace? Let's go to Philippians 4, 6, and 7. And please keep your Bibles open here because we have a number of points from this one chapter of Philippians 4. But we'll start with verse 6. It says, do not be anxious over anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, along with thanksgiving, let your petitions be made known to God, and the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and your mental powers by means of Christ Jesus. So again, when we feel anxiety, we're told to pray. It's interesting, in interviews with those miners in Chile, they made frequent reference to prayer and what a lifeline that was for them. And really, anxiety should move us to pray, because what does prayer give us? It tells us here in Philippians, prayer gives us peace, the peace of God. So we might think of it this way: the quickest way to go from anxiety to peace is prayer. That's what gets us there. So we need to openly express our needs, our concerns, our feelings to Jehovah in prayer, And not just certain things. You notice verse 6 says anything, everything. And why? Remember, God cares. He wants to hear about what's going on in our lives. I think what adds weight to these verses is considering, of course, this was written under inspiration, but it was written by the Apostle Paul to the congregation in Philippi. Now, previously, Paul had been in Philippi, and at that time, he was beaten by a mob, wrongfully thrown in jail. So what did he do? He prayed, and he sang praises. So Paul's advice here was not just some hypothetical advice. This was based on his personal experience. This is what he did during anxious times. And then at that time, something very unexpected happened. There was an earthquake. The prison doors were thrown open. Paul's bonds were loosened. The jailer and the family got baptized, and Paul was free. So no one could have expected an outcome like that. So the congregation in Philippi, no doubt, would have recalled what happened there. So what was Paul teaching here? He was saying basically this: don't spend time worrying, spend time praying, and then feel the peace of God. Now, in verse 7, we learn more about the peace of God. It says it surpasses all understanding. Well, what does that mean? Some translators render this as surpasses all our dreams or excels all human planning. So in other words, this peace of God is more wonderful than we can even imagine. So from a human viewpoint, we might not see the way out of our problems, but Jehovah does. And he can, at times, do the unexpected. But even if he doesn't do the unexpected, he will always give us the strength we need to endure through the trial. Notice verse 13. For all things I have the strength through the one who gives me power, which of course is Jehovah God. So whether Jehovah gives us the solution to our problem or he gives us extra strength to endure, either way we will get through and we will have peace while we do so. Now remember, we started with 1 Peter 5:7, throw your anxiety on Jehovah. And we see from these verses a major way to do that is through prayer. But here's a key. Once we've thrown our anxiety on Jehovah, we need to leave it with him. Because it's a great word picture. Once you throw something, what's left in your hand? Nothing. So we need to throw our anxiety on Jehovah and leave it with him. We don't want to take it back. I want to tell you a little experience I had. I was participating a couple years ago in this athletic event that included all these different activities, and one of them was the javelin throw, like maybe you've seen in the Olympics. However, we were definitely not Olympians, okay? So we weren't going for long distance here. We just had to throw it 20 feet and try to stick it into a hay bale. Now, for safety, the whole throwing area was fenced off. So you would stand behind the fence and you throw the javelin trying to get it in the hay bale. So you would throw and you would miss, because who's thrown a javelin before, right? So you would miss, and then again for safety, to retrieve the javelin, it was attached to a rope. So you would just, from behind the fence, you'd pull on the rope to get the javelin back for another throw, in my case, another miss, and I could just keep pulling it back and throwing as often as I needed. Now, I tell this because that illustrates what we tend to do with our anxiety. We're happy to throw it on Jehovah, and then we take it back. We throw it on Jehovah, and then we take it back. So we need to break that cycle. But how do we do so? Well, imagine this. Sorry, I forgot to get my visual aids here. Imagine after I throw the javelin, I were to pick up this granola bar from a valley of nature. Picked up this electrolyte beverage, carefully avoiding any product endorsements. But now, can I pull that javelin back? No. And why not? Because my hands are full. They're full of something refreshing. So now tying that back in with our anxiety, we throw it on Jehovah, we need to replace in our hands, so to speak, with something refreshing. So what do we need to do? We need to focus our thoughts, redirect our thoughts on positive, upbuilding things. Like what? Well, let's skim through verse 8. Paul tells us to think of things that are true, serious concern, righteous, chaste, lovable, well spoken of, virtuous, praiseworthy. So good, positive things. Now that takes self-discipline to force our mind away from whatever's causing us anxiety onto these positive things. But what can help us? Well, let's go back to verse 6. There's a key here. It says, in everything by prayer and supplication, along with thanksgiving. That's a key. We need to think about our blessings, because even in the most anxious of times, Jehovah has given us so many things to be thankful for. And when we keep thinking about those things, that keeps us positive. So this is an essential ingredient to this advice here. It doesn't work without it. Imagine that you're baking and you're told in the recipe to use flour and egg along with sugar to make your cake. Now, without the sugar, you just have bread. You need to have that sugar to have that sweet cake. It's an essential ingredient. So remember, we talked about the quickest way to go from anxiety to peace is prayer. But that's not just asking. It must include thinking. It doesn't work without it. So I'll give you a little homework. If you enjoyed this brief discussion, perhaps you could read all of Philippians chapter 4, and you can get all of this advice in context. You can see the other things that Paul shared under inspiration to help us to cope with our anxiety. So again, how does Jehovah give us peace to help us cope? Through prayer along with thanksgiving. Now, the second thing Jehovah gives us is comfort. How does he comfort us? Through the Bible. Romans 15:4 says that the things written in the Bible were written to give us instruction, comfort, and hope. And so we have very encouraging examples of faithful men and women who faced anxiety, but then also we see how they were comforted by Jehovah. So we'll consider briefly two examples. And now for the first one, before I tell you who it is, let me just ask you a couple questions. Are you sick of this pandemic? Do you want things to get fully back to normal? Do you feel anxious after almost 2 years? Well, then you could definitely relate to King David. Now, it's true, he wasn't facing COVID-19 or any other pandemic, but he was facing King Saul, who wanted to kill him. And because of that, David had to live as a fugitive in caves, which was not a normal life. And what did he do that for? 2 years? No, several years. Now, did he get anxious during that time? You might think, David, he was a spiritual giant, cut from a different cloth. But let's see. Let's go to Psalm 94:19. It's thought that David wrote this psalm. Psalm 94:19. It says, when anxieties overwhelmed me, you comforted and soothed me. David didn't just get anxious at times. At times he felt overwhelmed with anxiety. But then what happened? He says Jehovah comforted him. So how? Well, he turned to God's word. He didn't have the whole Bible like we have today, but he had many inspired passages that he could reflect on. So a great example for us. When we feel anxious, we turn to Jehovah through the pages of the Bible for comfort. And when we find a particular text that comforts us, we need to save that. So there's different ways to do it. Some people like to write it on a sticky note and they put that on their computer monitor or their fridge. Some people like to make flashcards. If you're a digital person, you might like to make a study note. You could even have a tag that says comfort. But whatever you do, do what works for you. And then when you feel anxious, you can pull up your list of scriptures and get that comfort from the Bible. Here's another thing you might want to do, perhaps as a study project. You could study David's fugitive life. So that's recorded in 1 Samuel chapters 19 through 31. You might say that's a lot of chapters, but remember, it was a lot of years that he was a fugitive. But as you go through there, you can see how Jehovah really comforted his servant and his friend David. Now for our second example, I'll ask just one question. Have you ever felt like you wanted to die? Now, if you've ever felt that way, no doubt it's not that you wanted life to stop, but just rather that you wanted the pain to stop, the frustration to stop, the anxiety to stop. Maybe at that time you felt like a failure, or you felt lonely, or you felt scared. Well, if you've ever felt that way, you could definitely relate to the example of Elijah. 1 Kings 19 tells us about when wicked Queen Jezebel threatened to kill this good man, and he runs away and he prays to die. That's how low he felt. But then an angel came and comforted him, and Jehovah spoke to him, and Elijah admitted that he felt like a failure. He felt lonely. He felt scared. But Jehovah encouraged him and helped him to focus on positive things. So if we ever feel like we have hit rock bottom, or maybe we feel that's where we're at right now, let's turn to Jehovah and let him encourage us. Jehovah gives us comfort. And how does he do so? As we've seen through the Bible, through encouraging, relatable examples like David and Elijah. We've seen that Jehovah cares not just about his people in general, but he cares about all of us as individuals. He cares about you. The next thing we can discuss is guidance. How does Jehovah guide us? Well, again, through the Bible. The Bible helps us to make wise, balanced decisions. And let's read now Psalm 119, 105. To see how the Bible helps us with our decisions. Psalm 119, 105. It says, your word is a lamp to my foot and a light for my path. So if you think about your foot, that's kind of where you are right now, and your path, that's where you're going. So the Bible helps us right now and as we progress through the future. And it compares God's word to a light. So you might think of like a flashlight. Now, it doesn't help just to have a flashlight. Let's say you're on a hike and it's getting dark. The flashlight in the backpack is not helping you. You have to have it out. You have to have it on. You have to use it to benefit. So when we're facing difficult decisions, we don't just need to have the Bible. We need to use the Bible. But how do we know? How do we know what Bible principles relate to the situation we're in at the moment? Well, two things we could do. We can do research in Bible-based publications. We can also ask an experienced Christian for help. Now, we're not asking him or her to tell us what to do, but just to help us identify what Bible principles we can reason on, and we can make our decision. Now, here's the reality. Even after doing that, we've got our spiritual light on. We can see the path, and that's good because then we're going to stay on the path. We're not going off into the thorns. We're not going off the cliff. But the reality is the path might still be very rocky and very difficult. So what can we do? One experienced brother made this recommendation. He said, make two lists. The first list is write down what you can do, the things that you actually have power over, actionable points. Write them out, make a plan, and stick to it. Now, the second list is things over which you have no control. You can't do anything about those things. And for those, it helps to identify, I can't do anything about these. So it ties back into our first point. We're going to pray about them. We're going to leave them with Jehovah. So again, this third point now, Jehovah gives us guidance. And how? Through the Bible, helping us to understand where we are and where we are going.
Your shadow is there.
Now, our fourth point, Jehovah gives us our necessities, our basic needs. Now, why can we say that Jehovah provides these?
No.
It's because he promises to do so in his word, the Bible, as long as we put his will first. Let's go to Matthew chapter 6, verse 33 to help us with this point. And please keep your Bibles open. Again, we have several points from Matthew chapter 6, and this is all part of Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount speech. So Matthew 6, we'll start with verse 33. It says, keep on then, seeking first the kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. So previously he was talking about our necessities. So he's saying if we seek first God's kingdom, these necessities will be given to us. So really, we see what is our job? Our job is to seek first God's kingdom. And then it's God's job to take care of us. So if we obsess over material things, it's like we're trying to do God's job. But really, we just want to focus on doing our job. Verse 34 says, so never be anxious about the next day, for the next day will have its own anxieties. Each day has enough of its own troubles. So was Jesus saying here, we don't need to put forth any effort. We just read the Bible and food appears on the table? Well, of course not. The Bible encourages proper planning. However, Jesus was making the point that undue anxiety about what might happen in the future can hurt our relationship with Jehovah. It could cause us to start relying on our own wisdom or thinking rather than on God's. So you might think of it this way. The Bible encourages us, plan ahead, don't worry ahead. You might think of it this way as a little illustration. Let's say that books represent anxieties. So what are my anxieties? Well, for today, I am a little anxious about the rent. I have to pay the rent. And I have to get groceries and I have to do some meal prep. And then also I had that doctor's appointment. Okay, so these are my anxieties for today.
Oh, no.
But you know what? I can manage this, and I can still focus on spiritual things as represented by my Bible here. And I'm not going to worry about tomorrow. But I am kind of worried about tomorrow, because you know what? Tomorrow, I have to get the car fixed. I hope they can fix it. And also, I have to help the kids with that project. And then also, I need to clean the house. And this has turned into a two-handed job.
Oh, no.
And now I have handicapped myself by taking on all this anxiety that I don't need. So I'm going to put this down. The point is, again, we need to have proper planning in life. But then beyond that, we want to deal with each day's concerns as they come, asking for Jehovah's help along the way. Some more great advice in Matthew chapter 6 is verse 11, which is still part of the Sermon on the Mount, but specifically Jesus' model prayer. So he prayed, Matthew 6:11, give us today our bread for this day. He did not say, dear Lord, give us the whole bakery. No, he said just today's bread. And there's a precedent to this. You think about when Jehovah literally provided bread for Israel with the manna. How did he do it? It was typically one day at a time. So we want to be content with what Jehovah provides as well. He may not always give us what we want, but he will always give us what we really need. Let's think again about those miners in Chile. It was 17 days before rescuers were able to send them food. Now, what do you think those miners were craving at that point? Okay, 17 days, no food. Maybe at that point they were craving some empanadas and beer. Okay, I don't know. But at any rate, I do know that is not what they got. Instead, they were sent down food that was specially formulated for people suffering from malnutrition. It may not have been what they wanted, but it was what they really needed. So the same for us as Jehovah provides. I think it's safe to say more people than ever before have benefited from government programs for food through the pandemic. And I was talking with one brother, and he was saying how he got so many apples. Every time it was apples. And he said, I would never have gotten so many apples if I had a choice in it. But he recognized that it was food and it was helping to cover his daily needs. Mm-hmm. What else does Jesus teach us? Well, in verses 25 through 32, he talks about stop being anxious about your lives and never be anxious about food, drink, and clothing. But the thing is, it is normal, it is natural to be concerned over material things. But Jesus, again, was saying to avoid undue worry, excessive fear of tomorrow. Now, is that really practical? So some reference works suggest that worrying too much makes us more prone to ulcers, heart disease, and asthma. So there's real health benefits to keeping our anxiety in check. Also, notice verse 27. Who of you, by being anxious, can add 1 cubit to his lifespan? So Jesus was making the point that undue anxiety is pointless. Focusing on our worries does not extend our life even a fraction of a second, and it just definitely does not improve it. And besides, things often do not turn out as bad as we had feared. Now, I love the way Jesus put it, but I also really like the way Mark Twain put it. He said, worrying is like paying a debt you don't owe. So do you want to pay that $100 you don't owe me? I don't think so. We don't pay debts we don't owe. So again, we don't want to have this undue anxiety. So how? Jesus was teaching trust in Jehovah. Jehovah feeds the birds and he clothes the flowers. So how much more so will he provide the necessities for humans who are seeking God's kingdom first. So we've seen from this part of the discussion that Jehovah has promised to provide for our needs as long as we put forth reasonable effort and keep Jehovah first in our lives. Now, the fifth thing we'll discuss, how Jehovah helps us to cope, is by giving us support. How does he support us? Through the congregation. What do we find in the congregation? Proverbs 17:17. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 17, this is what we find in the Christian congregation. A true friend shows love at all times, and is a brother who is born for times of distress. We find true friends in the congregation. Now, in the world or outside the congregation, it could be easy to find friends to laugh with, to hang out with, but are they true friends? That's a different category. I was talking with Sister Harvey the other day, and I will share some things she shared with me with her permission. She has a unique perspective just in having been in the Christian congregation and having left for a time and then coming back. And she's told me that when she was in the world, she had good friends and she could tell them anything. But then in times of need, they weren't really there for her. It was more of just a good times mentality. If she was sick or in the hospital, it was just, oh, I hope you feel better. It was very superficial. Compared with being in the congregation when times are hard, even recently, food is appearing food really does appear at the doorstep there. See what a difference there. And she mentioned one time some years ago that the family had fallen on some hard times to the point where they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. They almost lost their house and their vehicle, and some of the non-witness family knew, but didn't really do anything in a practical way to assist. But then when some in the congregation found out, they were upset because they wished they had known sooner so they could do something to help. And then there was one young couple, even though newly married themselves, gave a gift of money to the Harveys that allowed them to contact a lawyer who helped them to save their house instead of lose it, and then sell it and then live off that for 2 years. Amazing. This is what we find in the Christian congregation. True friends who are there especially in times of distress. So we definitely want to stick close to those in the congregation. It's beautiful. We have these meetings to provide upbuilding, association, and encouragement. And so we don't want to pull away. Maybe you're like me. I feel zoomed out. Okay. I am not jumping at opportunities to do more things over Zoom. But if we need to pull back, if we need to cut back, we should not do so when it comes to our meetings. No, we need these meetings. We need this time to be together and enjoy this Christian fellowship. So again, Jehovah is giving us support. And how? Through our brothers, through true friends that we find in the congregation. So we've seen clearly that Jehovah promises to give us what we need to cope with life's anxieties. Jehovah gives us peace, comfort, guidance, necessities, and support. And all of these come from Jehovah. So we need to work hard at building our faith in him. Because the more faith we have, the more these things will work. Now, does that mean that we could get to a point where we don't have any anxiety? Well, consider this. Jesus Christ was anxious on his last night of life as a human. And then an angel was sent to encourage him. Can you imagine getting a shepherding visit from an angel? It's incredible. But then after that, Jesus was still so anxious that his sweat became as drops of blood. So clearly, if you feel anxiety, that does not mean that you lack faith. Now, we started with 1 Peter 5:7. Throw all your anxiety on Jehovah because he cares for you. Now, the previous verse says that you can be exalted in due time, which tells us that full relief is not immediate, but it's coming. And in the meantime, we can trust in Jehovah. So basically, we're in the last days, the last of the last days. They're critical. They're anxious, but we have faith in Jehovah. So life will have both anxiety and faith, but our determination is that our faith always be greater than our anxiety. One of those miners described the rescue as a miracle. He said one person had respiratory problems and one was diabetic, but they were okay. We all drank unclean water and no one got sick. 17 days with basically no food and no one starved. Yes, all 33 of those miners survived. Of course, it was only made possible because of the help that they got from above. So for us today, we are facing so many challenges, but with Jehovah's help, we will all make it through. We will all make it through into God's promised new world. Of course, only possible with our help from above. But in the meantime, you can do it. You can cope with life's anxieties.
Yay.
Well, we thank you very much, Brother Geronimus, for coming and delivering that nice discourse for us. Certainly all of us have our anxieties. We need